In this video, we'll go over Off-Site Retention Volume, or Offv. Before getting into off-site compliance a little further, we need to define Stormwater Retention Credits, or SRCs. SRCs are a tradable unit as certified by DOE, and each one represents 1 gallon of stormwater retention capacity for 1 year that's installed voluntarily or in excess of a site's regulated retention requirement. 1 SRC can be used to meet 1 gallon of Offv. An important type of SRCs are high-impact SRCs, which are SRCs that are generated from new voluntary GI in the MS4. These SRCs have the highest environmental impact because they represent stormwater retention capacity in the MS4 that would not have existed otherwise because it is not associated with a regulated development. Let's take a moment to look at how SRCs can be generated from various projects. As we just covered, regulated projects have a stormwater retention volume, or SWRV, and are required to manage their stormwater to varying degrees, to the 1.2-inch storm for major land disturbing projects, and to the 0.8-inch storm for major substantial improvement projects. Regulated projects are able to generate SRCs through overcompliance or designing their on-site green infrastructure to retain stormwater in excess of their stormwater retention volume, but capped at the 1.7-inch storm. Conversely, unregulated projects, so projects that are voluntarily constructed and have no connection to a regulated building project, are able to generate SRCs on the difference between the pre-project retention capacity of the site up to the 1.7-inch storm. Let's establish a couple of definitions that are critical to understand if you have a regulated project. First, the Stormwater Retention Volume, or SWRV. This is the volume of stormwater that must be retained for a regulated project. In a previous video, we talked about the 1.2 and 0.8-inch storm retention requirements, and these 1.2 and 0.8-inch requirements are those projects' stormwater retention volumes. It's also time to introduce off-site retention as a concept. An off-site retention volume, or Offv, is the portion of a project's SWRV that is not met through on-site green infrastructure. Applicants that trigger the stormwater rule must comply with their stormwater retention volume, or SWRV, requirement. However, there is flexibility in how you can comply with the project's SWRV, for example, by building on-site GI, having an off-site retention volume, or a combination of on- and off-site approaches. Here is a simplified example of an off-site retention volume. Let's say we have a building that has a stormwater retention volume of 10,000 gallons. The project chooses to retain 7,000 gallons through on-site green infrastructure, and the remaining balance, or 3,000 gallons, is referred to as their off-site retention volume, or Offv. The primary way to meet your Offv is with Stormwater Retention Credits, or SRCs, which are the cheapest, easiest, and greenest option. Using SRCs satisfies your Offv for 1 gallon of off-site retention for 1 year. As a reminder, Offv is ongoing and must be met every year. SRCs are privately tradable on the SRC registry, which can be found in the surface and groundwater system. The price per SRC is negotiated between the buyer and the seller. DOE is not involved in these negotiations, but you can visit the SRC registry to see the current price listings, the recent 12-month average, and the average price per SRC from previous years. The current average price, as of recording this video, is $1.49 per SRC. To understand how much Offv you can choose to have, you need to look to different sewer sheds in the district. As I introduced in a previous video, the 2 main sewer sheds in the district are the MS4 and the CSS. The CSS is subdivided into the gray CSS, where DC Water's tunnels are being built, and the green CSS. In the green CSS, green infrastructure is still a high priority. The amount of Offv a project can have depends on where in the district your project is located. If your project is within the MS4 or the green CSS areas, you must meet at least 50% of your SWRV on site before you can choose to have an Offv. To retain less than 50% of the SWRV on site in the MS4 or green CSS, you must have relief from extraordinarily difficult site conditions which demonstrate that on-site GI is technically infeasible or would be environmentally harmful. Any Offv as an offsite option must be met using SRCs from the MS4 in the MS4 and green CSS areas. If your project is within the gray area of the CSS, there is no minimum on-site requirement as long as MS4 SRCs are used to meet the offsite portion. Otherwise, there is still a 50% minimum on-site retention requirement. This table summarizes which SRCs you're able to use based on your project's location. Projects in the green area of the CSS can use any SRC if they meet at least 50% of their SWRV on site and will need to use either MS4 SRCs or green CSS SRCs if less than 50% of their SWRV is met on site. Again, you do need to request relief in order to do less than 50% on site. Projects in the gray area of the CSS can use any SRC if at least 50% of their SWRV is met on site, and need to use MS4 SRCs if less than 50% of the SWRV is met on site. Projects in the MS4 are required to use MS4 SRCs regardless of how much on-site retention they achieve. AWDZ sites are required to use SRCs from the MS4, and if the SRCs are not from the Anacostia watershed, they will need to use 1.25 times more SRCs.